Hi, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use MMCE for daily operations. So let's jump into the details. So first, we want to make sure everything's okay. We want to make sure App Center is running the right version. We have the landing page there, and then we'll talk about how to launch a job, how to run things like Spades. We have a lot of applications we can launch, Salranger, GATK, Python, all kind of things. But we're gonna just take one example how to launch Spades, and then we'll check the job status. Right, once everything is up and running, we want to check, hey, what's the current status of the job, and then we want to look at the cost savings. Right, we want to make sure everything is benefiting from the MMCE. We are using Spot instances, things like that. And then we're going to scale this application, right? When you start with one type of VM, maybe it's smaller VM, couple of CPUs, and as the workload goes higher, we want to scale up. We want to scale to a much larger CPU when it gets really busy, and then maybe when it quiets down, we can scale back down to a smaller CPU VM. So we'll show you how to use the tools in MMC to accomplish that. And that's basically the whole demonstration. And then finally, we'll look at some of the details on how we were able to accomplish this. We'll look at how we create the job scripts and other things are really interesting to understand, such as VM policy, and then some of the way writer options. Okay, so with that, I'm going to jump into the actual demo itself. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is log into AWS, right? So we'll go in here, sign in. And that will take us to EC2. Okay, so from our last video, we know that our App Center is running, right? So this is the Jan 2023 App Center. I click on that and then click on open the address, and this will open the App Center landing page. It will tell us whether we have the App Center running healthy or we have the right license activated. So it's all green, all checked out, everything is great. And we also want to make sure we're running the right version of MMCE. So this is 1.2, which is the right version we should be using. That's all good. And then we're going to check the same thing from our command line, right? So we'll use command line to do majority of the work today. So we'll make sure that's all checked out as well from the command line. So we are logged in on the command line. We do a flow version. Okay, so we'll make sure we're running the right version. That's all good. And then the next step is to check out what images we have on the machine. Okay, so these are all the images you can run from MMCE, right? And at this time, we can see we don't have any jobs running, no jobs. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and launch a job. We're going to launch a Spades workload. Okay. Okay, now we are going to launch a Spades workload. So I'm basically copy and paste this command to launch a new workload, right? So we know Spades is available for us to launch. And basically the command is flow submit, and that will allow you to specify the actual shell script for Spades. And then we'll look into what is inside the script later on. And then we specify the application is Spades, 2 CPU, 4 gig memory. And then the data volume when we run Spades is we are going to reserve 200 gigs of storage mounted on /data. And this will allow us to kick off Spades. So we'll go ahead and do that. And so what's going to happen behind the scene is Spades is going to be launched on a VM. This VM is a Spot instance on EC2. And it's going to have around 2 CPUs and a 4 gig of memory. And this will take about maybe 2 or 3 minutes for this VM to initialize, right? So we'll be able to check the status of that. So we'll do a flow SQ. As you can see here, Spades is launching, right? So it's initializing. So through our scheduler, so we have a built-in scheduler. It is going out and request this machine to be allocated for Spades. And we can see the same thing in our MMCE in our AWS configuration. Go to EC2, and you can see here a T3A medium machine is being initialized. Okay, and this process, like I said, takes about a couple of minutes, and we'll come back in a few minutes to see, make sure it's fully up and running, and then we can look at the running state of Spades. Okay, so as you can see here, this VM is fully up and running, right? It's got the IP address and everything. That's all good. And then we're gonna go back to our MMCE. We'll go to queue. As you can see, this 2 CPU 4 gig VM is now having acquired. It's executing the Spades workload right now, which is great. And we are going to take a look at the status of this. So there's several ways we can look at the running state of this particular application or any application. Basically, you do a flow-j, specify the job ID, right? And then you can do a log ls, and they'll tell you what are the log files this application is producing. So you can see here, there's several files here. And the one that is most interesting are job files, job events, and output. Right, so we'll look at job events as well and its output in a second. Job events basically tells you what events related to the job, like the working state, when it's been triggered and all that. So we'll do a log cat job.events, and this will give us status on the VM, when the VM has been created, the VM instance ID, right? The flow volume is being mounted, want to be attached, and all these sort of operations related tasks. Storage, CPU, images is being loaded, right? So this gives us some stats in here. And then if the image doesn't load, or for whatever reason it cannot launch, it will give you some information here so you can diagnose. So that's one file. And then the other file we want to look at is the output. This is the output of Spades. It tells us the exact running state of Spades is like the log file of the application. So we'll take a look at that, right? So we'll cat the output file. So you can see here, with Spades, it tells you when did it start, right? It tells you load all the configuration. It tells you over here, Spades started and how many records processed, and it continues to process the record, the cell size, and all that, right? So between these two files, it will give you a lot of information on the running state of the application. So now we're gonna move on, talk about how we check how much it's costing and how much we save by running this workload. So with that, we are going to look at a file called float report configurations. So under flow report, you have a few files. So first of all, we're going to look at usage report by job. Okay, so we know we have, I'll make it a little bit smaller, so easy to read. Maybe even smaller. I'll resize the screen a little bit so it's easier to read. Okay, so you can see here with Spades, this particular job that's currently running, and the instance cost is this much versus on-demand cost is this much. Storage cost is this much, and then that's how much we saved. Obviously, we just launched this machine. It's a very small 2 CPU machine, so the amount of savings will look very, very tiny. But when you run this job, even just for hours or so, you can see there's very significant savings from running this. And especially if you're running with a lot more CPUs, memory, the savings will be very, very significant. But in any event, this is the file. This log file allow you to look at all this information. And you can save the log file, all these reports to a CSV, and then you can import that to Excel, and then you can get all of the stats on the all the job that you have run across all different applications. Okay, so this is how you can verify the savings from using MMCE. Okay, so now since we have the space running for a while, the next thing, the last thing we want to do is scale up or down to a different VM. So right now we have a 2 CPU 4 gig machine. So let's scale up to let's say a CPU 16 gig VM, right? So we can do that with MMCE, and then what you do that is you can float -J, again specify the job file, job ID, and then migrate, and then specify the amount of CPU you want to upgrade to. So I'll use a CPU 16 gig of memory, and ask you if you want to go ahead and do that. We say yes, and this will trigger the migration. So notice that the current state before the migrate is in executing state. You can see here on the log files, we're seeing the records being processed, data being processed. So now we are migrating to another instance, right? Another size of VM. Now you can see here the working host is now blank. It's being moved. The status is floating. It's floating from the old VM to the new VM, right? So that is what's going on right now. And this will take a few minutes, and then we'll go back in, look at all the stats, making sure everything is running again. So yeah, what's nice about this whole thing is that for me to scale up or down to a different VM, I don't have to copy any data. I don't have to save any files. It just seamlessly migrated over from one VM to the other VM. All the running state is all being kept. So it's much easier than I have to do a physical migration between 2 VMs. And I'm still using SPA instance. I'm still taking advantage of the SPA instance. Okay, so now let's go back, look at the status of the running instance. Okay, so now you can see here, we now have a CPU machine VM acquired, right? So we move from 2 to 8. And then the overall job, from the beginning till now has been running for about 16, 17 minutes. And then we are going to check the status of the log file, right? Make sure that everything is moved. But we want to make sure our application space is running correctly, right? Still running. So just like what we did before, we're going to check the log files. Okay, so we have job events and the output. So let's take a look at those two. Cat job.events, right? Okay, so we can see here, job floated. So the job continued to run from the old instance, right? So this is the VM we had before. This is the VM we're running on now, right? It's got more CPU, more memory, and everything. That's good. And then let's look at the output. Right, we don't want to see anything disruptive, right? We want to see everything continuous with the application. So you can see here, right? This is where we were before, somewhere around here, and then after it moved to a bigger machine, you can see here it actually speed up the amount of data it's processing per time units. So it's running roughly, okay, so if this was 3, 4, 5, now I'm running 10, 11, 12. So basically doubled, more than double, right, than what we were doing before. So with more CPU, more memory, our overall processing performance has increased to more than double than before. Okay, so that's great. That's the benefit of using the migrate feature in MMCE. The migrate feature sometimes is also called wave rider. This is how we do this manually to move from a small to a larger instance in the back. We can also automate this, which I will describe in the next video on how you can do that. Okay, so the final thing I want to show you is the actual the log files. So we know that we use the spades, right? So we use the spades script run spades.sh. So how do we create the script and what is in there? So we can take a look at that. Okay, so we are going to take a look at this file. Yeah, it's quite simple. It's really a couple of sections. So the first part of this, let me annotate here. The first part of this is really prepare the data, right? It's right here. So we basically copy our files from S3. So S3 bucket is where we store our spades files. Okay, so we first copy them from the S3 buckets down to the local data directory, which is /data, right? That's our data directory, and then we run the test. Okay, basically this is the spades command, right? metaspades.py, and then these are the parameters on how to run the spades. So this is very standard. This is almost the same way you run this at a command line. This all the steps you do normally will run in the kickoff metaspades. And then once everything's done, you upload the results from this machine to back to the S3. Right? We copy the data from the working directory, which is /data /spades back to the S3 bucket. The reason we want to do that is because we want to copy all the results back into a safe location, and then we can shut down this VM, right? Because everything's been finished, there's no need to keep this VM running. So if the job finished at, let's say, 2 in the morning, I don't have to, wake up and then shut it down right away manually. MMCE will do that automatically, right? So that's another way for us to save money. So that's how we can do that. And then yeah, that's it. So you do a prepare data, run test, save the result to the log file, and that's all there's to it in the in this shell script. And the final thing I want to show you are some of the flow options, the flow commands when you submit a job. So with flow submit, that's how we can submit a job into MMCE. And under flow submit, there's actually a couple of options that is kind of interesting. One of them is called VM policy. Okay, so you have something called spot only, spot first, on demand, and then spot only here, right? So these are the different options you want to pick from. The default is spot first. So we'll talk about that real quick. Spot first means that it's going to try with spot instance first, and then we'll try that 3 times, right? If it doesn't, if it's not successful, then it will use on demand. Okay, it will use on demand. While it's using on demand, it will keep probing for spot instances. If the spot instance becomes available again, it will move you back from on demand to spot. So it's quite intelligent in the way that it keep making sure that, number one, you can launch your job successfully, so you don't wait for spot instance forever, and then once the job is running, it will keep probing, looking at how can I get back to spot if spot wasn't available in the beginning. So that's the VM policy want to be aware of. For the most part, you will probably running this as a default, but sometimes you want to make sure that, hey, either you want to run spot only, meaning that I would never want to move this instance into on demand, Or you may want to say, hey, I want to run on demand only. I do not want to use Spot for whatever reason, right? You can do that as well. So you have a few options when you submit the job. And then the second thing is called migrate policy string, right? So what you saw earlier in my demo is I demonstrate how we can migrate a job from a small VM to a larger VM. And that was done manually. And especially if you know, like at some time of the certain stage of the run, you need a bigger VM. But sometimes you don't know, right? And the MMCE has ability to automatically detect, and it can move from a small to a large, or from large to small, vice versa, automatically. But you do have to specify some parameters on how you want to have this to be done. We're not going to talk about in this video, but we'll talk about in the separate video coming up. But stay tuned for that. Okay. So that's all we have for this. Thanks very much for watching, and then we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.